So it's all about anniversaries, So
yes.
Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum is 175, but what is 150?
150. I feel 150 sometimes, but I would say the Eads Bridge is 150 years old.
And 150 years ago, it was considered impossible and impractical.
This is the Can You Dig It podcast. We crawl into the crypts, gardens, and forgotten cemeteries. Join Dan Fuller, your resident cemetery chronicler, and Joe Shields, the plot-loving development exec, as we unearth the dark secrets of St. Louis and Bellefontaine Cemetery and beyond. From garden geeks to history buffs with a taste for the macabre, as well as fans of iconography, this is your podcast. We love diving deep into the shadows of history. Let's dig in.
So imagine being on a steamship, 1875. You're floating down the Mississippi or floating up the Mississippi. What's the first thing you're going to see when you pull up into the port of St. Louis? You're going to notice the first Catholic cathedral west of the Mississippi. You're going to notice, a bustling metropolitan center, and you are going to see an amazing marvel of engineering spanning one side of the river to the other, from St. Louis going to East St. Louis.
With 3 spectacular arched steel truss structures to keep that river free for all of those steamboats going beneath.
It had to have made you pause and think, just wow, this place, what else is here? What else is in the city once I'm going to make my way to the levee and then up into it?
Welcome back to our podcast concerning some of those folks from Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. I'm Dan Fuller. I'm the cemetery chronicler at Bellefontaine, and I'm joined by my good friend Joe Shields.
And I am the director of development for Bellefontaine Cemetery. And Dan, it is great to be here and great to see you.
So we're talking a little bit about the focal points of St. Louis, and prior to the arch and prior to the statue of St. Louis was the Eads Bridge, which came online in St. Louis July 4th, 1874. And it is a beautiful structure.
The bridge, the innovation.
Well, I think you got to talk about the man first.
What an interesting character. What a story.
Yeah. And it's truly one of those stories of starting from nothing. His father was one of those vagabonds who kind of went from place to place, couldn't really make ends meet, and then they decide they're going to pick up from Indiana and move to St. Louis. And unfortunately for the Eads family, when they get within visual range of the city of St. Louis, the ship they're on catches fire. Now, we was talking about this. We keep finding these stories evolving and changing. What I found out most recently is they didn't have to swim. They were close enough to a sandbar. They pulled over, they dropped the gangplank, and every single person on that steamboat walked off without any issue, but they lost all their luggage. And so, as I always say, the Eads family basically escaped with but the clothing on their back, and our 12-year-old then, James Buchanan Eads, had to start working, and his first job was selling apples.
And what a testament to somebody who ended up becoming one of the greatest engineers in all of history. To come to St. Louis, to take off with your family when you're 13 years old in 1833. And then as you said, as you're approaching the shore, your boat catches fire and you know that there's a problem and you lose all your belongings. And so here you are, here's your introduction to St. Louis. You have absolutely hardly anything.
Yeah. And Dad actually moves on from St. Louis. He can't really make it here. And so he decides to go on up the river. And James Buchanan Eads decides, this is where I'm going to stay. This is where I'm going to try and make my stay. And he gets associated with the warehousing individuals and becomes what's known in St. Louis as a mud clerk. Mud clerks are kind of what I call middle management. They're hustling between the steamboats and the warehouses, and they get covered with mud, so that's where the mud clerks come from. But when he is age 21, he hooks up with one of our other important people at Bellefontaine, and that's Emerson Gould. And he will board the Knickerbocker at age 21 with a full working scale model of a steamboat under his arm. It's got a little boiler, can make a little steam, and it puts across the boat. And he really becomes enamored with the river at that particular point. And everything he does for the rest of his life is somehow or another attached to transportation, waterworks, keeping the river in channel. And people know about him for his bridge, but there's so many other things that he did.
Prior to him doing that with the Knickerbocker, He's 13 years old now, and he has, as you alluded to earlier, he has to sell apples as his first job. But then he gets a fortunate job working at a dry goods store for Williams and During. And it's that time that Mr. Brett Williams lets him go to the library upstairs and read books on his own. So James would read countless books about science, mechanics, and machinery, and he was self-taught. Think about the knowledge that he picked up during that period. And then he goes into the transportation business, and he takes that knowledge with him. And I can only surmise that he's, an entrepreneur at heart, and he's just thinking about what he can do, how to improve this, what's next. And he's truly one of our great entrepreneurs of the 19th century.
I think it really does start with his family, because Mom and Dad have moved off. His sisters are going to stay behind with him. And he's kind of the breadwinner very early. A little bit later on, he'll marry and then go ahead and have a couple of girls from that particular relationship. He loses his wife and then takes a second wife, which is actually the widow of his cousin. And 3 more girls come into it. And I know for those that have females, that can be an expensive outing.
Working on the river is no joke. I've been on a barge or 2 myself, and it is not for the weak at heart. It's you don't get hurt. You don't get hurt easily. You don't get injured. You don't necessarily get scratched. You don't necessarily break a leg. You're going to have a severe injury if you get hurt, or you're going to lose your life.
Yeah, but now Eads is going to do things that people went out of their way not to do. And I think the big surprise for a lot of people is what his first invention is. Because again, they always jump to the bridge, but his first invention is the diving bell. And that is a 55-gallon whiskey barrel that's weighted with lead, so that when they drop it into the water, it's going to go down to the bottom. And you know what he's fishing for?
Salvage.
More lead.
Yeah.
17-pound ingots. St. Louis is a very important port. We'll hear some numbers in a little bit, but just below us down south in the Potosi area, there's lead mines. That lead comes up here. It's going other places. And of course, steamboats will go down quite frequently. And so part of the main thrust of his salvage aspect is salvaging that lead that's gone down. And so I just want you to imagine, close your eyes, think about being dropped off the side of a ship in a whiskey barrel, turned upside down, with weights so that it sinks to the bottom, and you're kind of fishing around at the bottom in the silt looking for these 17-pound ingots. And you got a rope, you'll tie one on, pull on the rope, goes up, walk some more, find another ingot. And Eads didn't have people do things that he wouldn't do himself. So back to your whole injury aspect, who wants to go taking a walk at the bottom of the river?
So the city of St. Louis is not even 100 years old yet. And here comes this young man who wants to make a name for himself, wants to do better in business. And here he is, and now it's going to be the 1840s. Just think of the mighty Mississippi. It's like mud. It's not clear. It moves at anywhere from 10 to 12 feet per second. And there is no technology. I mean, you are on the cusp of pioneering technology itself. You're turning whiskey barrels upside down to try to get these things to work.
Mark Twain will later say about St. Louis water.
What's that?
Too thin to plow and too thick to drink.
But Mr. Eads, he's just one of these, rare figures in history that is going to, of course, have the guts to do this and have the knowledge to do this and have to prove to other people that this will work.
Yeah, and that's where I go back again to that impractical and impossible. He had to have the tenacity to do this because he repeatedly was told, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. So he's going to take that information that he learns from doing all that salvaging and understanding what's down in that murky water. And when it comes to now the Civil War, he is tapped to do the ironclads. Everybody talks about the Merrimack and the Monitor, but they don't talk about the first 7 ironclads made here in what was then the Carondelet shipyard just south of the city of St. Louis. And those 7 ironclads would be significant to the siege at Vicksburg a little bit later. But I'm going to drop something here. The Milwaukee.
Ooh, what's the Milwaukee?
SS Milwaukee, and later on we'll come back to it.
Okay.
podcasts are a powerful tool to reach your target market in today's digital age. Here's why. Listeners can tune in whenever and wherever they want, fitting your podcast seamlessly into their lives. Unlike videos, podcasts don't require full attention, allowing listeners to multitask while absorbing your message. Podcasts foster a more intimate and personal connection with your audience compared to text-based content. Podcasts allow you to niche down and target a specific audience with interests directly relevant to your message. Now, why launch your podcast with EG Media Group? EG Media Group is a one-stop shop for all your podcasting needs. They'll help you with strategic planning. They'll develop a plan to reach your target audience and achieve your podcasting goals. Their team will ensure your podcast sounds professional and polished. They'll help you get your podcast out there and reach new listeners. So, if you're looking to leverage the power of podcasting to connect with your target market, visit egmediagroup.com today and turn your podcasting dream into a reality. That's egmediagroup.com. EG Media Group. Create, connect, convert.
So you mentioned the Milwaukee, and I'm very, I want to know about the Milwaukee. But first, let's talk about the ironclads. And you know what even allows Mr. Eads to participate or partner with the government to build the ironclad ships for the Civil War is the fact that he was able to retire very early in his career in 1857. And keep in mind, he comes to St. Louis in 1833 as a young boy, and he's retired cold from the river in 1857 with a fortune of $18 million from diving for salvage and just bringing up salvage. And I'm sure his inventions had some played into that fortune as well. But an ironclad is a ship that he built for the Union Navy during the Civil War in the Carondelet Ship Works, just south of St. Louis. And he built 7 of them. It was, the ships were the St. Louis, the Carondelet, the Cairo, the Cincinnati, the Louisville, the Pittsburgh, and the Mound City. And these ships would help win the war. They were made of iron. They sat very low to the water, and they were almost impenetrable by cannonball. Yep. And he would end up building 30 ships in his career.
Right, and one of those will be the Milwaukee, which we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Tell me about the Milwaukee.
But, well, no, we get that. That's got to come in time. You know, we got to bait this just a little bit. But he did come out of retirement to do that, and it's back to the fact that he's here in St. Louis. And one of his very good friends is a guy named Edward Bates. And Edward Bates happens to be Attorney General to Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. And so when Abraham Lincoln needs something, he reaches out to Edward Bates, and Edward Bates knows that there's a man in St. Louis who can kind of do the impossible and the impractical.
Edward Bates and Captain Eads are not buried too terribly far from each other. Maybe half the cemetery separates the both of them.
Yep. And
just what a story of firsts. You know, St. Louis has just an extraordinary amount of men and women who pioneered a first of something, whether it be the first in beer, first in shoes,
last in the American League.
Last in the American League.
So Eads doing those ironclads are very important, but what ends up really connecting him to the military is the fact that his mechanism for the turrets is far surpassing anybody else's. And you were talking before about patents and things, and he had retired. Yes, he retired, but once he came back and started doing this military work, his patents will become a very big lion's share of what he is able to generate revenue-wise. And it's not just the United States government, it's many governments across the world that will use the patents for his turret system. And this is where he starts to get this national and international recognition.
And coming out of the Civil War, we have a need for a bridge to cross St. Louis. And here comes Mr. Eads with his idea for the Great Bridge of the Grand Bridge.
Correct.
And that story, just focusing on his life and the story of the bridge, it could be a movie.
Yeah.
With the struggle that he had to convince people that his engineering would work.
Right.
And the drama that took place with the steamboat lobby trying to stop him.
Right.
It seriously could. It has all the mechanisms for a great movie.
So let's talk the timeline real quick, because I think this is really important. So the Civil War ends in 1866, and in 1867, the concept for the bridge comes. But it is laid quiet till 1869. And the reason is The Wiggins family has a lock on all the property in Illinois for about 5 miles. And so they're going to negotiate all of this before it publicly comes out that it's going to be for a bridge. So 1869 is when everything is kind of up and in everybody's face, and they'll finish the bridge in 1874. Eads, in that particular period of time, is told repeatedly what his design is will not work, it will not work, it will not work. But the best thing, and again, to leverage in what you're talking about with steamboats, they made it that they could not stop the flow of steamboats. And so for the first time, a bridge is going to be built in cantilever. It had never been done before. So cantilever function is where you have a rock solid pylon, and you're going to extend from pylon to pylon and meet in the middle. And of course in St. Louis, one of the best examples of this is the Gateway Arch. So that was done in a cantilever. It got up to a particular point. They had to put a strut in between, and then they finished it out and put the keystone. It's similar to what actually Eads will do with his bridge, and he's got 3 cantilevers going on, one on the east side, one on the west side, and the one that'll span the middle. So that meant that all the steamboats can ply the waters of the Mississippi and not be interrupted by the construction that's going to take place over that period of time. So you really have to applaud his ingenuity.
So the steamship lobby was vehemently against this because they could see the writing on the wall with the loss of revenue. And the steamship lobby had tried to lobby the government, the federal government and the state government, to make the bridge so high and the dimensions so large that it was literally impossible to build. Like, there would not be enough revenue or time to build this. And that was their opening salvo. They tried to sabotage the effort that way. And what they thankfully did not end up not being able to have done is, the world's first steel truss bridge. The largest span is 520 feet. The height is perfect for a steamship to fit under there. And Dan, if you could explain, you do a much better job in this than me, how a rail car had to decouple on the Illinois side and then and then make its way to Missouri.
So people always think that there was no rail traffic until the bridge was there. That's very false. We had trains that would come to the Illinois side. They would get onto a ship such as the Albatross, which could take 16 rail cars at a time. They'd go across, they'd come up, they'd re-hitch, and they'd go on, and then the empty cars would come back across. And for St. Louisans, the Albatross will come back in a different life as the Admiral. That particular ship was big enough to hold 16 rail cars at a time. So there was rail traffic there, but we hadn't had that bridge, and again, impossible and impractical. James Buchanan Eads is going to figure out a way to do it, and of course it's an uphill climb for him because much of the revenue of St. Louis is derived from the ferry system, and so it's an uphill climb for him.
And how long did it take an average rail car to arrive in East St. Louis, decouple from the train, get on a boat, make its way across to Missouri, and then get back on a train and up the hill?
And that's why the Albatross was so important, because it's that action. And so if you can get 16 cars over at a time, then you're cutting that down. But you were talking about hours at a particular point getting that across. And then, the idea of a bridge that is just going to cluck, 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 cluck right across is pretty lucrative to those on the rail side, not the steamboat side.
And these men and women who operated these companies in the 19th century, there was a lot to lose. One of Bellefontaine Cemetery's storied captains of industry is John Boffinger. At the height of his career, he would have 91 steamships under his command. And I know I've read accounts that on any given day during great weather, there would be 2 miles of ships lined up the Mississippi waiting to dock to unload their goods and then get back down the river. So This was a very busy port. Still is.
Yeah, still is. So steamboating, very important aspect of St. Louis. And when we're talking about the Eads Bridge, it's kind of issuing the end of the steamboating era. So steamboating is going to come all the way from pre-Civil War till the building of the Eads Bridge. And when Joe was pointing out the fact that for 2 miles you had steamboats, that's not just one line. It could be 3 steamboats deep at the shore. And we're talking about traffic control. Yes, there were definitely, as this progressed and grew, there were definitely people into it. We had harbor masters, we had the whole 9 yards. But initially, it's kind of like the Wild West, and everybody's on their own thing. And part of my favorite aspect is, you'd have a steamboat captain and he'd go, hey, it's Tuesday, I'm going to go to Hannibal, and then I'm planning on coming back on Thursday, and then you'd get up to Hannibal, and then he decided to play cards for a couple extra nights, so I'm not going to go back until Saturday. And if you decided you went to trot to another ship, you didn't get your money back. Your money was down. You're going on that ship whenever the captain decides it's going to come back. So it was a very interesting Wild West kind of a situation. And then it will evolve and change. And then there'll be people like J.J. Rowe that we could talk about on a later date. And Boffinger, like you said, or Bowfinger if you wish.
Yes.
There's always this double pronunciation in St. Louis.
I bet you, I have nothing to base this on, but I can only imagine that getting in and out of the harbor, it was a gentleman's agreement. You just played nice in the sandbox. But I do know that there were some infamous steamboat captains, like Isaiah Sellers, who they were not a less than stellar reputation on the river. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine that maybe something like getting in and out made their reputations a little less than stellar.
Mm-hmm. But let's go back to Eads.
Yes.
Because Eads, as we kind of explained before, what a cantilever is, you can't cantilever unless you have a solid foundation. And on the Missouri side, the foundations are going to have to go 90 feet. That's where the bedrock comes in. And as they're doing those, they're doing it through a system called caissons, where basically you are pressurizing the atmosphere so that pushes the water out and that the men can dig, and they're just dropping. It's not like you're building a foundation from the bottom up. You're building a foundation from the top down. And there are some experiences of this thing that's initially called the Grecian bends. But it's not until they get to the Illinois side, where they're going to have to go almost 300 feet deep, that it becomes a kind of cataclysmic thing with deaths occurring.
Just think of 150 years ago. You're pioneering technology. You're doing something for the first time ever. And I'm not trying to minimize the deaths, but for the period of time that you're building this bridge, 15 workers died. 2 became permanently disabled, and 77 were severely afflicted by caisson disease, or the bends.
But the other number I got to give you is the number of men that worked on it.
How many is that?
900. So wow. Again, we put 15 into, what we might be working on today is 150 or 200 men working on a project. But this is the age of labor, and so there were 900 men who worked on that. And yeah, there was unfortunately the fatalities, and some of what they learned here in St. Louis would help save the lives of others later. But it was a trial and error aspect. Initially, these men thought that they were coming up too slow, so they wanted them to come up faster, which only made the situation worse. Then, and I don't want to use radiation, but they thought that something was penetrating their bodies from that deep depth, and so they made these guys who are already under distress wear iron chest vests, and that just made things worse. Then they got the idea that maybe they need to come up slower. But the people who were working the doors would just go ahead and open the door whenever they heard a knock. And so it's the physicians who finally take over and take the keys away from them and go, no, these guys are going to wait for 20 minutes. Then we'll open the door. They can go up to the next level. Then they got to wait another 20 minutes. And slowly but surely, this is how they figured out how to beat the bends. The Grecian bends initially, apparently because the men who were coming up with this disorder walked like a woman with the big bustle on their back, and they had this reclining walk to them, and that's how it got called the Grecian bends. So something I want to double back for you, because I know you're just dying to hear about, cemetery humor, dying to hear about. The Milwaukee. The Milwaukee was one of those additional boats that Eads built here at the Carondelet Shipyard. And it went down to Mobile, Alabama, was in an altercation. It was actually sunk there. And when our friend James Buchanan Eads is up here in St. Louis sinking his caissons, he is short of wrought iron, and he needs more, and he remembers the Milwaukee. And he used his expertise to raise the Milwaukee. And let's just think about that. He had to walk it all the way back here to St. Louis from Mobile Bay. And much of the caisson work that's on the east side, the Illinois side, is reclaimed material from the Milwaukee.
I'll be darned. So how much would you pay for a bridge?
That's a good question. Back then, $11 million. Now, we equate that out to today, that's a little over $220 million. Now, that's not a good way of giving you an example. So we're going to move to the forward and the stand span. The entire stand span was just under $1 billion. And a lot of that money actually came from the approaches on the Missouri and then the Illinois side. So if we just look at the bridge, that was $365 million. So at $220 million versus the 365, it is modern technology, impossible and practical, but it was a good deal.
It was a good deal. And, a similar cost would be the Poplar Street Bridge, was completed for $30 million. By the way, the Poplar Street Bridge is one of the bridges that crossed the Mississippi at St. Louis. And that was completed for $30 million, which is roughly $284 million today. So it's not too much terribly more expensive than what Eads had spent 150 years ago.
But the Eads Bridge is beautiful.
It was the symbol of the city of St. Louis until in the mid-60s, 1960s, when the arch was built.
Yeah, some would say that in between was the Statue of St. Louis after the World's Fair. So it went Eads Bridge, Statue of St. Louis, and then the arch. But we have a difference of opinion.
We thank you for tuning in, and we highly encourage you to listen to the next episode, because we're going to talk about the celebration of the Eads Bridge when it opened, if you can dig it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, and please share this episode with your family and friends. If you got value from the episode as well as the podcast, you can do it right from the platform you are listening on. Take a screenshot and tag us and tag yourself. We are at Podcast Can You Dig It on Instagram.